This video is sponsored by my day job. All views and opinions are my own. Likes and subs are appreciated, but don't hit the notification button. Does anybody actually even do that? Seems annoying. Don't do that. Are you starting to feel like all open world games use the same mechanics? Been there, done that syndrome starting to take over? Well, here's a list of JBG's top 6 open world games. Keep in mind, opinions are like buttholes. So let's get into it. Welcome back to JBG. This is another video that wasn't initially planned, but we're going to strike while the iron's hot. I keep finding myself bouncing off average open world games faster and faster every year for various reasons. One being how much bloat is put into most AAA releases nowadays. I just don't have the attention span to keep up with a lot of them. This started as a list of 5 open world games, but there was an honorable mention that I still had to throw in, so we ended up with 6. I'm probably going to do a video on most of these anyways, so it's a good warm-up for later videos. I'm going to try and keep this as spoiler-free as possible, because I know there's still a few people out there like me that can somehow avoid major spoilers for years before playing something. Keep in mind, these are my own. This is my list, and there's definitely caveats to all the entries and where I rank them. At number 6, or my honorable mention, I have Elden Ring. I know a lot of people will question how I could only add this as an honorable mention. Don't worry, I'm sure you'll question some other entries here too. Elden Ring was the first modern-day From Software game I didn't rage quit after about 10 or 20 hours, and I never really bothered to get good on any of them before this one. The initial step out in the world is probably the best they've done, next to Dark Souls 2. As you inch your way through the first few areas, get past the first few roadblock bosses, the world starts opening up, and opening up, and opening up some more. It really did keep me hooked. Finding the next area, the next map piece, see how much more ground there is to cover in the area, and the open world really made it the most accessible Souls-like game. Outside of the opening areas, you really don't have to smash your face against a roadblock the way you have to in most Souls games. You can wander off, find dungeons to clear, stuff in the open world to loot, and you'll naturally level up to ease the difficulty spikes, at least for the first half of the game. Now this is where the caveats start, and why I consider this more of an honorable mention than an actual inclusion. First is the fact there just isn't really any story. I know, I heard it all from the fanboys. You have to read the item descriptions and enjoy environmental storytelling. Look, lore is not a story. It supports a story and builds the world around a story, but it's not the story. Is the Silmarillion telling the story of the Lord of the Rings? No, it's building the world around the story. The gameplay is good enough that it's still fun without coherent narrative though. But this leads to the next point. There's a difficulty spike towards endgame that was almost enough to make me rage quit again, saved by the ability to wander off and come back to the roadblocks later. But the scaling is just a mess at endgame. This isn't really what makes me rank it here though. I platinumed this game on the first playthrough, so I obviously pushed through it. But the constant repeated bosses, even some becoming regular enemies, it's where it started to eat at me. I spent somewhere around 120 hours to finish this thing. And with this kind of bloat, especially late game, it feels like the devs aren't respecting your time as a player. This also ties in with another reason. The wonder of the open world is completely gone after the first run. In fact, I started a new game plus. I looked at the map and was just kind of defeated. There was no reason to go explore, because at that point, I had already seen every area. I didn't want to slug through a lot of them again, or the bosses that I know will come up multiple times again later. One day I'll play through again for some game cap and do a video, and I'll explain it with spoilers so it'll make a bit more sense. But for me at least, Elden Ring is an absolute amazing experience on the first time through. I just can't see much pull to go through it again. But I would still strongly recommend everybody at least attempt to get through the game at least once. That sense of discovery on a first playthrough is really an accomplishment. At number 5, I have the obligatory Witcher inclusion. I know, it isn't technically an open world game, but the areas are so huge, it may as well be all connected maps. Add in the DLCs that I still haven't gotten around to finishing, and yeah, it's pretty much an open world game. This is probably the top of most people's lists. The stories, even the side quests, they're so well done, it really falls into the typical fetch quests, if ever. The pacing is a bit weird, like, oh, the Wild Hunt is chasing Ciri down, let me go get this frying pan for an old lady. But even the frying pan quest has some narrative twist that blindsides you when you're used to so much filler. The graphics hold up, and with the next gen patch, it rivals some new releases. The biggest downside to this game, I would say, is the length and how in-depth the story is. It's really hard to go back to this game after a few weeks of not hopping in because it's kind of confusing. You just lose track of everything. The length itself is my second downside. I'm not really sure how fast you could speedrun it, but it's borderline level gated with gear and enemy levels so I never tried. I only managed a full playthrough twice, and I think both averaged somewhere around 80 hours each. That's a huge time commitment to the average adult with a full-time job and a home life. The storytelling, though, is second to none, and the world is full of things to explore, side quests that spin out of control. Even with the length, this is one I would put on the list as every gamer should at least play through it once. Number 4 is probably going to be a lot of people's "what are you talking about" moment. At number 4, I have Elix. Not Elix 2, actually the first one. Piranha Bytes created a world here that I can't really compare to much else out there. Running around with a jetpack, tech armor, a battle axe, and a laser rifle? I'm in. I think the first one has a fascinating narrative too. Between Jax's background and how he ended up being where he is at the beginning of the story, the vast differences in factions, and the build up to the end, I really think they hit gold here. But this is not at all going to be a game for everyone. Piranha Bytes is pretty well known in the genre of Eurojank. This game is no different. The combat feels floaty, hitboxes are all over the place. Elix 2 does a much better job with this, but it's kind of recycling the same storyline that you'd be lost in without playing the first one anyway. Even the jetpack acts more as a booster jet than a Superman flying around type of thing. Elix 2 lets you eventually get to that point, but it's so late game, and even on a PS4 Pro, the popping gets so insane it's basically unusable. There's a cult following for Eurojank games since they take chances that AAA devs don't want to take, and they tend to be much more original for this, Elix being an example. If you can get into a game that has some control issues, optimization issues, I would highly recommend a playthrough of the first one. Even the second one after if you can pick it up on a sale. Number 3 is probably going to be another "huh" moment from a lot of people. At number 3, I got Far Cry 5. This is where Ubisoft started to actually listen to the burnout the players were getting from their recycled mechanics, at least to be a little bit fresh. You aren't climbing towers or viewpoints to reveal the map. It's cleared organically through exploration. There's even the famous "not gonna have you climbing towers" line right in the intro area. They got it here, and had a sense of humor about it. Another draw I have to this game is that it's set in my own country. Tropical islands, exotic places, it's all well and good. Sometimes something set in your own backyard is nice for a change. The story is also one I can follow more than any of the other Far Cries. A backwoods cult up in the Montana mountains? I'm in. This narrative has a real Red State feel to it. A great Kevin Smith movie if you haven't seen it yet. Pretty dark storyline, but still with the ridiculousness that you find in any other Far Cry. I think it was the first Far Cry I played and the only one I ever finished. And I'm actually doing a playthrough right now for some GameCat. I couldn't really put my finger on why this one stuck with me outside of the narrative until someone labeled it pretty well for me. It's a chaos simulator. In a way, something like the Just Cause series has just never been able to duplicate. The kind of chaos simulator that's going to blindside you right when you get done killing everyone to rescue a hostage. Then as soon as you release the hostage, a mountain lion comes out of nowhere and kills him. It's the insanity that just happens here that leaves the humor twist in such a dark storyline. It's a great touch. Also pretty sure this is where the best stealth weapon in any game ever was introduced, the shovel. But I'll talk more about the shovel when I do the Far Cry 5 video. I say the main caveat to this one is that if you aren't a fan of the gameplay loops of most Far Cry games, not sure this is going to be the one to catch your attention. If you're like me though, and you love a darker narrative, one you can kind of relate to the location a little bit, I would totally recommend a playthrough of this chaos simulator. I really didn't want to do this, but I didn't see any way around it. At number 2, I have the obligatory Skyrim entry. I would argue that Oblivion should be here instead, but the availability of Skyrim on everything that is a circuit board makes this accessible to pretty much everyone. I bought so many versions of it at this point, I have to own it. Everyone knows this game by now, so I'll kind of gloss over most of it. But even after all these years, and all these upgraded releases, it's still pretty easy to get lost in this world. The downsides? Well, it's a streamlined RPG meant to appeal to a broader audience. And it's Bethesda. There are going to be bugs upon bugs upon bugs. And holy freaking fetch quests. Pretty much 90% of all the side content here, it's all get this thing, bring the thing back, get a small amount of gold that won't even be worth it halfway through the game. But like I said, I still have to own the fact I bought this game at least half a dozen times. And I still can get lost in this world for hours on end. And what has to be my favorite game of all time. At number 1, I have Fallout New Vegas. I picked up Fallout 3 on a whim, and I had no idea Obsidian was in the works on New Vegas. I just randomly stumbled on it about 8 or 9 months after getting Fallout 3. I've been hooked on this game ever since. No lie, it's probably the only game I would put my hour count into the thousands. There are still holdover fetch quests everywhere, but with the Obsidian spin on it. It's an improvement to Fallout 3 in almost every way I can think of. Somehow I still haven't platinumed this game after all these years. Maybe I'll go for it when I eventually get around to doing a video on this one. But the insane level of freedom in this game is what always brings me back to it. They even won up Bethesda on their own engine. In Fallout 3, you could kill anyone, and the main story arcs would just have a different pickup point later. Well, everyone except kids. They were considered essential NPCs. So what did Obsidian do? They got rid of them altogether. Now, New Vegas still has its bug problems. Everything in the Gamebryo engine does. But I won't hate on Obsidian for that. They developed and released this game in 18 months. 18 months. There's still a ton of bugs here. You'll need a pretty high tolerance for them to get through this. But if you're on PC, it's not as much of an issue. And there's so many mods for this, it's pretty much a different game altogether at this point. I still go back and play this on PS3 every year or two, so I guess I've just kind of grown numb to the resets and loading times. The dark humor around every corner, new things to find every time I dive back in, still having the RPG elements tie into the gameplay options, those were all but removed from the later Fallout games and the Elder Scrolls. I personally put this at the top of all open world games to this day. And here's hoping all the buzz from Obsidian lately on a sequel or a remaster gets some footing. So if you're still around at this point, let me know what your list of top open world games are in the comments below. Or let me know if any of these are actually on your list. Until next time.
What? Toodaloo, motherfucker. Hey.